this is a very uneven federation controlled by an elite in Moscow and St. Petersburg. It cannot last. And so, what many of us are hoping for, and some people are doing, is trying to bolster these sovereignty movements. Some are already well on their way, like Chechnya. They've tried to leave twice, bloody wars. They will leave once there's weakening. And I think you will see others break away, and I think China will pounce.
We're speaking as the US Secretary of State Antony Blinken is visiting China, his second visit after last June's, to try and thaw tensions. He's expected to express deep concerns over China's aid to Russia's defense industrial base. How far does China's support go?
Uh, they have intel that it's pretty significant, but it's at the edges. They're not sending weapons. They're not sending bullets. They're not sending missiles or drones. But what they are sending is the underlying mechanisms, some of the technology that is required for their defense industry in Russia, which they don't have the capability of producing themselves. That's worrisome. They're also doing, niggling cheating. For instance, reports that they're labeling as scrap metal containers full of copper, and copper is very useful for the defense industry in Russia. They, of course, have been a collaborator, as has India, all throughout the war by buying the oil from Russia in huge gobs, and I think they should be taxed for doing that, and India too.
Antony Blinken has pointed out that China can't have it both ways, good relations with Europe and other countries while fueling the biggest threat to European security since the end of the Cold War. How much longer do you think China can play both sides?
I think having gotten caught here and there, I think they'll back right off. I think they'll stop it. Remember, China is dependent on customers in Europe and the United States, and the customers are not happy with them. And any headlines that talk about it, I mean, the fact that they've been caught cheating when they promised not to help the war effort is probably why TikTok has been banned in the United States. I mean, this is the kind of pushback they're going to get, and it could be worse than that. And then there's a lot of reshoring and that sort of thing. And China has serious economic problems. They've done a lousy job of managing themselves, and so I think the China issue in this war is an economic warfare rather than a out and out military warfare.
But you also you write in a recent article regarding Russia that China is biding its time. What is it waiting for, do you think?
Absolutely. Look, China was put in a terrible position. If you recall, they had an Olympics they were very proud of in 2022. And just days before the big opening or closing ceremony, I've forgotten, Putin went there and he got Xi to sign a long-lasting friendship, partners for life, without telling him 3 days later he was going to genocidally invade his neighboring country. He never told him. This was hugely embarrassing. He set him up for that. And, I think he's distanced himself as much as he can. He also does trade. He really needs the energy that he gets from Russia for his economy. He's got economic trouble. Now, what I mean by their waiting, they're on the sidelines, but they're very much involved in what happens to Russia after all of this is over. And many of us, and I've been writing quite a bit in my Substack, speculate that, once the center doesn't hold, which happened in 1989-90 in Russia, in Moscow, if they lose the war, then the Moscow elite, whoever replaces Putin, are not going to be able to hold on to 11 time zones of nation. It's just too big and vast a country. Now, at the very far east edges is Manchuria, which was only stolen from China 200 years ago by a czar. They want Manchuria back, and they're going to get it. The minute there's weakness, they're going to move, not necessarily sending troops, but they will move politically to seize influence and control over it.
So what is the doomsday scenario for the Russian Federation? How do you see the worst case scenario? Because you're talking about a kind of collapse of the Federation, mirroring the collapse of the Soviet Union.
Well, that's what happened with the Soviet Union. All of its republics, beginning with Ukraine, spun off, 15 of them. And now you have many republics inside the remaining Russian Federation. And I've printed a lot of maps and so on. There are the Turks, and the Turkish Organization of States issued a statement a few years ago that there are 10 autonomous, sovereign Turkic states inside the Russian Federation that should be independent. So you get that kind of pressure, ethnic pressure. They've been mistreated. Their living standards are dreadful. People in Moscow and St. Petersburg, their children are not getting drafted into the war, but the ethnic groups in the Mongolian areas and the Turkic areas and the Central Asian areas of Russia are getting drafted. And, this is a very uneven federation controlled by an elite in Moscow and St. Petersburg. It cannot last. And so, what many of us are hoping for, and some people are doing, is trying to bolster these sovereignty movements. Some are already well on their way, like Chechnya. They've tried to leave twice, bloody wars. They will leave once there's weakening. And I think you will see others break away, and I think China will pounce.
And where will they pounce and how will it happen?
Manchuria. Manchuria, which would also give him Vladivostok and the Sakhalin Island, which is full of oil and gas.
I mean, this is obviously all dependent on, presumably, what happens with the war in Ukraine. And it's far from a given. It's speculation at the moment.
Correct, correct.
Where does all of this leave that so-called friendship without limits? Is that just history now between President Putin and President Xi?
I don't think it'll ever be spoken of. I think that what Xi has done is distance himself. Yes, they've had summits and so on, but he has publicly said a couple of years back, do not even think about using nuclear weapons. And also, it is illegal to invade another sovereign nation. So he has said those two things on the record, but he's got to play it carefully because he needs the energy, and he's got a lot of problems in his own internal economy. I mean, he let the real estate thing get out of control, and of course, the pushback over his association and his threats toward Taiwan have resulted, and the COVID resulted in a lot of factories moving to India and back to Europe and North America, out of China. He's got problems.
A recent report in the Financial Times newspaper here in the UK pointed to the Russian army's utter distrust of China going back as far as 2008, with these leaked documents that outlined exercises its military was doing, preparing for a possible invasion by China. So they were obviously taking this seriously back then. And those fears, you believe, I mean, what is the Russian position towards China at the moment?
I think they hope they'll just stay in the background and stay passively. Remember, the border between Russia and China has been the subject of wars for many decades. They've been fighting over all this thing, and Manchuria was just stolen 200 years ago by the Tsar, and so I think that China plays a waiting game. I think it's going to play a waiting game at Taiwan. It's not going to scoop in and get Taiwan. The thing in Taiwan that I think is misunderstood is that, yeah, sure, they would like to, grab it because it's very prosperous and it's full of ethnically Chinese Han people. But, the point is that they can't take on the United States, Britain, Australia, and the rest of Asia. They have a huge navy in the region, not to occupy and take over Taiwan, because they are completely dependent on shipping lanes remaining open. And there's lots of disputes along the route. They have to get oil from Europe and Saudi Arabia and the Middle East. They have to send their stuff that they make in the same direction. They have to keep the shipping lanes open. And I think they have a very big navy, apparently larger than the United States in the number of ships, not size. As did Britain. Britain was a trading nation. It was an empire. It had to have a big navy to get around. So I think I think China is, as a NATO official said a few years ago, China is a competitor. Russia's an enemy.
You've been watching Frontline for Times Radio. My thanks to Louis Sykes, our producer. To support the work of Frontline, hit the subscribe button. You can also listen to Times Radio throughout the day or read it at times.co.uk. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.